All right, today we're jumping into a spiritual memoir that's really more like a detective story for the soul. I mean, it's this incredible journey that kicks off with a vision that makes no sense and wraps up with this completely unexpected twist about what identity even is. So, just imagine this for a second. You're 22, and you're still trying to figure out this wild, mystical experience you had as a teenager. You wander into a bookstore, a total stranger tells you to get a specific book, and as you're walking out, you drop it, and it falls open to one single page, and the face looking up at you is the same exact person from your vision. I mean, it sounds like fiction, right? But this is a real event, and it's what sets this whole story in motion. Okay, so to really get why that moment on the sidewalk was so huge, we've got to rewind. We're going back 4 years to the very beginning, a vision in the middle of the night that just completely shattered the author's world. So when he's just 18 years old, he has this incredibly powerful, totally spontaneous out-of-body experience. His consciousness just leaves his body. And in that state, this being appears. And it's not made of flesh and blood, it's made of pure light. This figure doesn't say a word, but instead just sends this wave of unconditional love that's so overwhelming it feels like coming home after being lost your entire life. And then, poof, it's gone, leaving him with this memory he can't explain and this deep, burning need to understand what on earth just happened. That experience, as you can imagine, left him searching, really searching. And 4 years later, in a bookstore in New York City, the universe basically dropped the first massive clue right at his feet. And that was the face in the book. Now, this is where it gets just wildly improbable. Think about this chain of events. You've got the vision at 18, then 4 years of looking for answers. He walks into some random esoteric bookstore, and this man in a saffron turban just appears, points to Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi, says, "This book is very good," and then just vanishes. So he buys the book, walks outside, it slips out of his hands, and lands open to one specific page. And there he is, the man of light. And the author's reaction was just total certainty. As he says, it wasn't a maybe, it wasn't someone who just looked similar, it was him. The face in that book was Lahiri Mahasaya, who was the guru of Yogananda's own guru. So this wasn't just a crazy coincidence. This was a confirmation that his very personal, private vision was somehow plugged into this much bigger, well-documented spiritual history. So you'd think the mystery would be solved, right? Nope. This event didn't end the story. It basically cracked it wide open. It sent the author on this quest that lasted a decade, trying to understand not just who this figure was, but how they were all connected through this vast network of souls. And his search eventually led him to this really fascinating concept called Kuthumi. Now, Kuthumi isn't a person. The idea is that it's this huge collective consciousness, kind of like a sun. And from this one source, all these different individual souls emerge like separate rays of light. They're all distinct, but they all come from the exact same source and carry the same essence. And this is where it just gets completely mind-bending. He starts to discover that this spiritual network connects figures you would never ever put together. For instance, one expression of a soul from Kuthumi showed up as Balthazar, one of the three wise men, and was then reborn as the Greek mathematician Pythagoras, and then later as Sri Yukteswar, who was Yogananda's own teacher. Another ray of light from that same source expressed itself as John the Disciple, and then later as Paramahansa Yogananda. And the final piece of the puzzle was realizing his own soul was also part of this ancient interconnected web. But here's the twist in the story. You'd think uncovering this incredible past would be liberating, right? Well, it wasn't. It actually created a brand new and honestly a much more sophisticated prison for his ego. And it all came down to this massive internal conflict. So on one side, you've got the ego, which just loved this story. I mean, its goal was to be special, to have this amazing spiritual identity that made him different. But on the other side, you had his soul, which had a much simpler desire. Not to be special, just to be authentic. Not to stand out, but to just be present and feel connected. And this turned into this really painful paradox for him. Every psychic, every medium, every weird synchronicity that confirmed he was part of this grand lineage. It just made the bars of this new cage even stronger. His search for truth had secretly turned into a search for validation, this desperate need to prove he wasn't just some ordinary guy. It looked like freedom on the outside, but on the inside it felt like a trap. And finally, after years and years of this, he just broke. He was totally exhausted from looking for answers from other people, just tired of this whole spiritual identity he built up. One night, he just falls to his knees. And this wasn't some polite prayer. It was this raw, desperate scream from the very bottom of his soul, a demand to know the truth directly, for himself, with no one else's interpretation. And in that quiet space between being awake and being asleep, an answer finally came. It was just one single word, but it was crystal clear, and it vibrated through his entire body. Tulku. He had to look it up. It's a Tibetan term for a reincarnated master. I mean, wow. It was the ultimate confirmation he'd been looking for all these years. And yet, there was still this little sliver of doubt. Was this the real truth, or was it just his ego's masterpiece? And that brings us to the final, and really the most profound revelation of his entire journey. The truth he was looking for all along was not the one he ended up finding. So here it is. The ultimate truth was a total paradox. The whole point of this incredible journey wasn't to prove that he was special or extraordinary. The point was that he needed to fully believe that he was special so that he could finally let go of the desperate need to be special. He had to completely embrace his own divinity just so he could finally be at peace with his own humanity. This line just captures that feeling perfectly. You know, the emotional breakthrough wasn't about discovering some new, fancy identity. It was about remembering a truth that had been there all along. The freedom wasn't in becoming someone special. It was the incredible relief of not needing to be anymore. And so, the whole memoir kind of leaves us with this question. The author's journey started with a crack in his reality, that vision of light. It was like a wound, this longing that drove his entire search. So the question it turns back on us is, where in our own lives does that sacred crack, that deep longing, burn today? Because as this whole story shows, that might just be the doorway that leads us back home.